There is a city in regional Victoria where the houses sell for a third of what Melbourne charges, and the winters come in cold and gold across the hills. Ballarat, a place most Australians associate with the Eureka Stockade, with Lamingtons at the Botanical Gardens, with the kind of quiet civic pride that shows up in well-maintained heritage facades and school holiday crowds at Sovereign Hill. But there is another Ballarat, one that the tourism brochures have not found a way to explain and the local council has not found a way to categorise. Scattered across this city, embedded in stone walls, carved into sandstone lintels, pressed into the facades of buildings that predate Federation, are faces, human faces, dozens of them, some grotesque, some serene, some watching the street below with an expression that seems, in the wrong light at the wrong hour, closer to awareness than decoration. 12 of them stand out. 12 that researchers, stonemasons, historians, and the occasional, very determined amateur have looked at closely and come away from without a satisfying answer. Not because the carvings are crude or ambiguous, because they are specific, deliberate, executed with a skill and intention that raises questions nobody in the official record has cleanly resolved. Tonight, we go through all 12, what each one looks like, where it sits, what the competing explanations say, and what remains stubbornly unexplained. If this is the kind of deep regional history that gets under your skin the way it gets under ours, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. We cover the parts of Australia that the major publications skip, and we do it without shortcuts. Now, the faces. Face 1. The Linton Street Watcher. On a stretch of Linton Street in the inner residential belt of Ballarat East, there is a sandstone wall that has stood since the 1880s. The wall borders a property that changed hands 6 times in the 20th century without anyone apparently thinking to ask about what is set into the stone near the northwest corner. At roughly head height from the footpath, facing due east toward the morning sun, is a carved human face approximately 22 centimeters across. The face is male in its proportions. Strong jaw, pronounced brow ridge. The eyes are deep set and carved with a precision that creates genuine shadow in afternoon light, giving the impression that the pupils are tracking movement on the street below. The mouth is closed, but not sealed. There is a suggestion of expression at the corners, something that different observers have described differently. Contentment to some, mild displeasure to others. The stonemason who assessed it in 2019 described the technique as consistent with ecclesiastical carving from the mid-Victorian period, but found no corresponding record of a church commission or architectural project that would explain its presence on a residential boundary wall. The property records show a private residence on this site since construction in the early 1880s. The original owner was a merchant involved in the wool trade. No known connection to stonemason guilds, Masonic lodges, or religious institutions has been established. The face looks east and has been looking east for at least 140 years. What nobody has answered cleanly is why a merchant would commission a face of this quality for a boundary wall that most visitors would walk past without noticing. Quality carving at this level was expensive in 1880s Ballarat. It was not decorative filler. It was intentional expenditure for a specific purpose. What that purpose was has not been recovered from any surviving document. Face 2. The Sturt Street Pair. Sturt Street is Ballarat's main boulevard and one of the most photographed streetscapes in regional Victoria. The wide median strip, with its war memorial, elm trees, and civic gardens, has been extensively documented across the full photographic history of the city. And yet the pair of carved faces set into the facade of a 2-story commercial building midway down the north side of the street went without comment in the academic record until a heritage architect noticed them during a routine survey in 2014. The pair face outward from a position flanking the first floor window frame. They are not identical. The left face carries what appears to be a feminine cast. Softer jaw, more open eye construction, a slight upward angle to the gaze. The right face is broader, more severe, with a downward carved line between the brows that could be a frown or a deliberate compositional choice to create visual contrast with its companion. Together, they bracket the window symmetrically, which suggests a decorative intention consistent with Victorian commercial architecture. The curiosity is that the building's original construction documents describe window ornamentation as plain dressed sandstone. No carving is mentioned. No carver is invoiced. The faces do not appear in the construction records. 3 possibilities have been discussed. Either the records are incomplete and the faces were always there, or the faces were added after construction by a subsequent owner. Or the faces were added by someone who had access to the building and the skill to work quickly in sandstone and no particular interest in being documented. The second possibility currently stands as the working assumption. The first and third remain technically open. Phase 3, the Mechanics Institute threshold. The Ballarat Mechanics Institute has operated on Sturt Street since 1859, making it one of the oldest continuously operating cultural institutions in Victoria. The building has been extended, renovated, and refaced across multiple decades, which makes attribution of any individual architectural element genuinely complicated. The face carved into the sandstone threshold of the eastern entrance door is an example of exactly that complication. The threshold carving is not at eye level. It is horizontal, pressed into the upper surface of the stone step at the entry, meaning that anyone entering the building in normal circumstances would step directly over it without ever looking down at the right angle to see it. You need to stand outside, lean back at roughly 45 degrees, and look at the entry platform directly to see the face clearly. It is a full face, symmetrical, eyes closed. The expression is peaceful in the way that carved faces on memorial architecture tend toward peaceful. A researcher from Federation University documented it in 2017 and described the carving style as inconsistent with the surrounding stonework, suggesting it may predate the step's installation in its current position, meaning the carved stone may have been repurposed from an earlier structure. That interpretation would make this face older than the Mechanics Institute threshold it currently sits in. Older than what? From where? Those questions have not been answered. The stone is consistent with local quarrying, but tracing a specific piece of dressed sandstone to its origin point is close to impossible without surviving documentation. Phase 4, the Brewery Lane cluster. Behind a commercial block in the western part of Ballarat's central business district, there is a laneway that runs between the backs of heritage buildings and connects 2 parallel streets. On the western wall of the laneway, at a height of approximately 3 meters from the ground, there are 4 carved faces arranged in a rough horizontal line. Rough in arrangement only. The individual carvings are precise. Each face is distinct. One is bearded. One has an open mouth, the only open mouth in the 12, appearing mid-speech rather than settled and closed. One has markings carved into the cheeks that could be tribal scarification, could be decorative lines, or could be damage that time has made look intentional. The 4th is the most stylized, with features reduced to minimal geometric forms that sit somewhere between portraiture and symbol. Nobody has formally established when these faces were carved. The wall they inhabit is consistent with late 19th century brickwork, but the faces are in sandstone blocks that appear to have been inserted into gaps in the brick face, meaning the wall came first and the stones came later. This has been interpreted as deliberate installation and as opportunistic repair work using carved decorative stones from another source. The open-mouthed face is the one that tends to stop people who find the laneway by accident, standing at the base of the wall and looking up at a carved face with an open mouth 3 meters above the ground in a laneway that most of the city has no reason to visit, produces an effect that is difficult to describe precisely but easy to understand if you have experienced it. Face 5. The Craig's Royal Hotel Keystone. Craig's Royal Hotel on Lydiard Street is among the grandest surviving examples of Victorian goldfields architecture in Australia. Built during the height of Ballarat's gold era prosperity, it hosted royalty, prime ministers, and visiting dignitaries. The building's architectural decoration is detailed, deliberate, and extensively documented, which makes the keystone above the secondary entrance on the northern face all the more interesting. The primary architectural keystones across Craig's Royal Hotel carry classical decorative motifs. Scrollwork, floral forms, geometric patterns consistent with the building's formal Victorian aesthetic. The keystone above the secondary entrance is a face, a specific individuated face that does not appear in the original architectural drawings and does not match any of the building's documented decorative elements. The face is androgynous in structure, wide across the temples, narrow at the jaw. The eyes are carved at a slight downward angle, looking out over the street with an expression that reads differently in different light conditions. At noon, under direct sun, it appears neutral to the point of blankness. At dusk, when the shadows deepen in the carved eye sockets, it carries something that guests arriving at the hotel have occasionally found unsettling without being able to articulate why. The working theory offered by heritage architects is that a stone carver working on the secondary entrance took the opportunity of a less supervised commission to insert a personal element. This was documented practice among Victorian stonemasons, who sometimes left carved likenesses embedded in their work as a form of private signature. It is a credible explanation. It does not explain why this face looks the way it does, or who it is supposed to be. Face 6. The Lake Wendouree Wall. The Ballarat Botanical Gardens sit alongside Lake Wendouree on the western edge of the city centre, and the stone boundary wall bordering the gardens on the eastern lake path has stood since the late 1800s. The wall is made from local bluestone, quarried from the same geological deposits that supplied much of the goldfields construction across regional Victoria. Bluestone is hard to carve. It resists the detail that sandstone accepts with relative ease, which makes the face embedded in the garden wall's northeastern corner all the more technically impressive. The face is carved entirely in bluestone. This alone narrows the field of possible carvers significantly. Detailed figurative work in bluestone requires specialist tools and a skill set distinct from sandstone carving. The face itself is male, strongly featured, with a beard rendered in deep-cut parallel strokes that required sustained precision in such resistant material. The expression is the most unambiguous of any on this list. Whatever word you would use for a face that appears to be looking at something just over your left shoulder with calm certainty, that is the expression on the Lake Wendouree wall face. The Ballarat Botanical Gardens maintenance records from the relevant period are fragmentary. The stonework was carried out by multiple contractors, and the face's position on the corner, where two sections of wall meet at a junction, suggests it may have been carved as a cornerstone marker. This practice has historical precedent in both British and continental stonework traditions, but the precedents are documentary, meaning there is typically a written record connecting the marker to a guild or a patron. No such record has been found for this face. Face 7. The Eureka Centre Shadow Face. This one requires direct sunlight at a specific angle, which is part of why it went undocumented for so long, despite sitting on a highly visible heritage wall near one of Ballarat's major tourist sites. The wall borders a property in the Eastern Heritage Precinct, constructed from the rough-dressed stone common to 1860s and 1870s Ballarat construction. In ordinary light conditions, the wall looks like exactly what it is: a well-preserved section of mid-Victorian stonework. At approximately 4 in the afternoon, on clear days between March and October, the angle of the western sun catches a section of the wall, and the natural relief of the rough-dressed stone creates a shadow pattern that resolves unmistakably into a human face. The face is not carved in the conventional sense. The stones have been dressed and positioned such that their natural relief, combined with that specific light angle, produces the image. It is either one of the most sophisticated examples of intentional optical stonemason work in Australian heritage architecture, or it is an accident of remarkable precision. The researcher who first formally documented it in 2016 spent 3 visits to the site attempting to determine which explanation applied. Her conclusion, published in a regional heritage journal, was that the odds of the effect arising accidentally were low enough to support intentional construction, but that intentional construction at this level would represent a degree of planning and skill exceeding any comparable documented example in the colonial Australian record. The face appears for approximately 40 minutes. Then the light shifts, the shadows move, and the wall is just a wall again. Face 8. The Doveton Street Lintel. Doveton Street runs north from the central business district into Ballarat's inner residential belt, and the street contains one of the most intact concentrations of 19th century residential architecture in the city. The face on the lintel of a terraced house midway along the street was brought to wider attention in 2018 when a local heritage advocate included it in a walking tour of carved stonework, and the image circulated briefly through local social media before interest moved on. The lintel face is the most overtly expressive on this list. The mouth is curved. The eyes are wide. The overall impression is of a face mid-surprise, or mid-laughter, or mid-something that the carver intended to communicate and communicated well enough that 130 years of weathering has not reduced it to ambiguity. It is clearly a face doing something facially specific. What it is responding to is not recoverable. The terrace itself was built as one of 4 matching residences. Only this one has a carved face on its lintel. The neighbours have plain dressed stone at their entries, consistent with the construction documents held for the row. 2 working theories exist. Either the original owner commissioned an individual variation from the builder, or the stone carver working on the row added the face to this particular lintel without instruction. Both explanations are plausible. Neither is supported by surviving documentation. Face 9. The Ballarat Jail Exterior. The old Ballarat Jail on Mayor Street is a significant heritage building that served as a working correctional facility from 1862 until 1970. Its bluestone walls are among the most substantial surviving examples of colonial institutional construction in Victoria. The faces carved into the exterior wall on the Mayor Street face are, depending on your interpretation, either a documented tradition of penal architecture symbolism or something considerably more difficult to categorise. There are 3 faces on the jail's exterior wall. All 3 are in bluestone. All 3 are positioned at a height that would have required scaffolding to carve, meaning they were not added after construction. They were carved during the building process, placing them within the work of the contracted stonemasons who built the facility in the early 1860s. What makes them noteworthy beyond their technical quality is their expressions. Jail architecture of the period used symbolic stone carving in specific and documented ways: deterrent imagery, severity, institutional formality. These 3 faces carry none of those qualities. 2 of them appear almost contemplative. The third has the quality of someone mid-thought, the expression that crosses a face when understanding is arriving at something previously unclear. A historian of colonial penal architecture who examined them in 2020 described them as inconsistent with the established symbolic vocabulary of Victorian correctional buildings and suggested they may represent individual stonemason signatures. That interpretation has not been challenged in the published literature, but it has not been conclusively established either. Face 10. The Golden Point Quarry Mark. On the fringes of the Golden Point area, where the goldfields landscape still shows its worked history in the undulating ground and exposed rock faces of the old claims, there is a section of natural stone outcrop that was partially quarried in the 1860s and then left. The quarrying stopped for reasons not recorded, and the outcrop became overgrown and largely forgotten until a local history group documented the site in the early 2000s. On the face of the quarried section, roughly 2 meters up from the base, there is a carved face pressed directly into the natural stone. This is different from every other face on this list. All of the others are in dressed stone constructed into a building or wall. This face is in natural rock, in a quarry, carved by someone who was at the site with tools and time and the intention to leave a face in the exposed stone of a working goldfields quarry. The face is simple compared to some others on this list, but simple in the way that faces with confident hands behind them can be simple. The proportion is correct. The placement on the stone is considered. The eyes are level. It is the work of someone who knew what they were doing. Why would a stonemason working a goldfields quarry in the 1860s carve a face into the rock? Guild traditions included quarry marks ranging from simple geometric symbols to figurative carvings. But guild marks were typically positioned at the base of the quarried stone, not 2 meters up on the face. This positioning is unconventional enough that the local history group's report noted it without resolution. The face at Golden Point remains on natural stone in a site most visitors to Ballarat never find, looking out over a landscape that has not been worked for 160 years. Face 11. The Town Hall Cornerstone. Ballarat Town Hall is one of the defining buildings of the city's civic identity. Its construction in the 1870s was a statement of prosperity and institutional permanence from a goldfields community that had survived long enough to believe in its own future. The building has been extensively documented, photographed, and assessed across the full period of its existence, which is why the face on the northeastern cornerstone is somewhat embarrassing to the historical record. It should have been noticed earlier. It is not hidden. It is on a cornerstone of the main civic building of the city, at a height of approximately 2 meters from the footpath level. Thousands of people walk past it daily, and yet it does not appear in any published architectural assessment before a stonemason conducting maintenance work noticed it in 2011 and raised it with the Heritage Office. The face is carved in relief, meaning it projects outward from the stone surface rather than being incised into it. Relief carving in a cornerstone required the carver to plan for it during the dressing of the stone before placement. It could not have been added after installation without highly visible disturbance to the surrounding surface. This face was always intended to be there. It is a portrait in the proper sense of the word. There are specific features, a particular shape to the nose, a particular set to the jaw. This does not look like a symbolic or generic decorative face. This looks like a specific person. Who it is and why their likeness is in relief on the cornerstone of Ballarat's Town Hall is a question the Heritage Record cannot currently answer. Face 12. The Dana Street Collection. The final entry is not a single face, but a collection, which makes it the most extensive concentration of carved stonework on this entire list, and simultaneously the most difficult to treat as a single, coherent subject. Along a section of Dana Street in the Heritage Residential Precinct, a row of Victorian-era properties built between approximately 1875 and 1895 contains, across their stone boundary walls and entry gate posts, a total of 11 carved faces. Different styles, different scales, probably different carvers, and different periods of execution. But the cumulative effect of 11 carved faces along a single residential street across properties that have different ownership histories and different construction records raises a question that a single anomalous face does not. Something was happening on Dana Street that made carved faces a recurrent choice across multiple properties across at least 2 decades of the street's development. Not a single eccentric patron, not a single stonemason's private habit. Multiple decisions by multiple parties over multiple years, all arriving at the same expression of intention. The most credible explanation advanced is a localized stonemason tradition, possibly centered on a particular workshop active in the Dana Street area during the relevant construction period, for whom figurative carving was a professional signature. This is a well-documented phenomenon in European stonework traditions and not impossible in colonial Victoria. But the specific workshop has not been identified. The tradition, if it was a tradition, has no surviving documentation to confirm it. What Dana Street offers instead of answers is quantity. 11 faces, 11 separate decisions. Whatever this was, it mattered enough to someone or several someones to do it over and over again. So those are the 12. 12 carved faces in a regional Victorian city where you can buy a house for $300,000 and spend the rest of your life walking streets that hold questions nobody has fully answered. What strikes you after going through all of them is not any single face. It is the consistency of the gap. Each face has a credible working explanation. And for each one, that explanation stops at the same place. At the point where documentation runs out. At the point where the written record simply does not confirm what the stone clearly records. Somebody made each of these decisions. Somebody held the tools. Somebody chose the placement, the scale, the expression. And for 12 faces in a single city, that somebody and their reasons have not survived in any form the archive can recover. Ballarat is an affordable city with a heritage streetscape of genuine quality. It is also a city that, if you walk it slowly and look at the right height on the right walls, is watching you back from carved faces that have been there since before anyone living today was born, and that will not be explaining themselves anytime soon. If this kind of deep regional history sits well with you, leave a comment below telling us which face you would go to see first. Subscribe for more content on the overlooked and underexplained corners of Australia. We will see you in the next one.